By dawn, the man everyone feared would be alive. Only because a stranger decided to betray her own fear. The restaurant was the kind that didn't need a sign outside because the city already knew it. Warm gold lights bled softly through tall glass windows, turning winter darkness into something expensive and forgiving. Inside, the air smelled like truffle oil, aged wine, and quiet power. Every seat was occupied by people who spoke in careful voices, the way people do when they're sitting too close to money they didn't earn. The staff moved like shadows trained to never collide, never spill, never look anyone important in the eye for too long. And still, even in a room designed for calm, tension had its own scent. It lived in the pauses between laughter. It hung behind the clink of crystal. It watched from the corners where security stood pretending they were decor. Then the door opened, and the entire restaurant felt him before anyone said his name. He walked in with a kind of presence that didn't demand attention. It erased everything else. The Korean Mafia boss wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His black suit fit him like it was sewn onto his bones. His hair neat. His expression controlled to the point of cruelty. A faint tattoo curled just above his collar, dark ink tracing his neck like a secret the world wasn't allowed to read. He didn't scan the room the way ordinary people did. He measured it. He counted exits without turning his head. He noticed the guards pretending not to be guards. He noticed who stopped chewing when he entered. He was followed by men who didn't speak. Not because they were trained. Because silence around him felt like law. And beside him, linked to his arm like she belonged there, was his fiancée. She smiled as if the restaurant had been built for her. Beautiful in a way that made people forgive things they shouldn't. Diamond earrings caught the light with every movement of her head. Her eyes were soft, her lips glossy, her hand resting on his arm like she was holding something wild with practiced ease. The hostess almost bowed too low while leading them to the private table. Guests whispered, subtle at first, then quieter, because nobody wanted to be caught saying the wrong thing when the wrong man could hear even silence. The waitress assigned to their section didn't look at him right away. She had learned not to. Learned that looking directly at dangerous men made them feel invited to ruin you. Her name tag said Hannah, but it wasn't her real name. She wore her hair pulled back tight, earrings small, makeup minimal. The uniform fit her like a disguise. Her skin was deep brown, warm under the lights, but her eyes were the color of alertness. The kind of eyes that never truly rested. She carried a tray with steady hands, and no one would have guessed her heart was punching her ribs hard enough to bruise from the inside. She watched the room the way survivors did. Not like a waitress. Like someone waiting for the moment a lie collapsed. She placed the wine glasses down gently. She poured with a smooth wrist. She listened without listening. The boss didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Every time his fingers tapped the table once, his men shifted slightly behind him like they were breathing on command. His fiancée laughed softly at something he didn't say. The sound was sweet, almost normal, almost convincing. But Hannah saw the first sign when she went to refill water near the bar. A man entered through the side corridor. Not dressed like staff. Not dressed like a guest. He wore a neutral coat, too plain, too practical. His eyes didn't admire the decor. They didn't search for someone to greet. They checked angles, corners, mirrors, like he was trying to make sure nothing could see him. The second sign came from the hostess desk. Quick nod. A whispered exchange. A subtle adjustment of an earpiece that no hostess should have been wearing. Then Hannah saw the third sign. Small, almost invisible unless you were desperate enough to notice it. A waiter she didn't recognize passed behind the boss's table and dropped a napkin. Not by accident. The napkin fell in a perfect place to block the view of the boss's right side from the nearest camera. Hannah's stomach turned cold. Someone was shaping the room. Quietly. Professionally. And the scariest part was how smoothly it was happening, like this wasn't chaos. It was choreography. She returned to the table with another bottle of wine, keeping her face calm, her steps measured. The boss's eyes lifted for half a second, and for a moment she felt like he saw through the uniform, through the fake name, through the life she was pretending to live. His fiancée smiled at Hannah too warmly. It wasn't kindness. It was performance. The boss lifted his glass, but he didn't drink. Hannah noticed his thumb pressed once against the side of the stem, a tiny movement, like he was thinking, calculating, waiting. Hannah's throat tightened. Her mind screamed at her to walk away, to mind her business, to survive the way she always had, by staying invisible. But then she saw it point. One of the men near the entrance adjusted his jacket, and the corner of something metallic flashed beneath. A gun. Tucked with confidence. Not hidden with fear. She looked at the boss's men. They hadn't noticed yet. Or maybe they had and were waiting for a signal they hadn't received. She looked at the boss. His head was angled slightly toward his fiancée as if listening, but his eyes weren't on her. They were on the reflection in the window behind her. He was watching the room through glass like a predator refusing to show his teeth too early. Hannah's fingers trembled around the wine bottle. She had seconds, maybe less, and she made a decision that would erase her old life forever. She leaned forward as she placed the bottle down and slid a folded receipt onto the edge of his plate as if it were nothing, as if it were ordinary, as if her heart wasn't breaking itself open. She didn't speak. Words were dangerous. Cameras existed. Ears existed. His fiancée's smile was too sharp. She only let her fingertip tap the paper once. A silent command. A warning disguised as service. The boss didn't move. Not immediately. He cut his steak with slow precision, like the world wasn't pointing a gun at his back. Then, with the same calm he used to breathe, he unfolded the paper under the table with one hand. His eyes dropped to the message. Only one line. No extra explanation. No begging. No fear written into it. Just truth sharpened into a blade. Your fiancé sold you out. They're in position. For the first time that night something changed in the room. Not the lighting. Not the music. Not the guests sipping wine like nothing mattered. The change happened inside his face. His jaw didn't clench. His eyes didn't widen. He simply stopped existing as the man at dinner and became something older. Something colder. Something that survives storms by becoming one. He lifted his gaze slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world to decide who would die first. And across the table, his fiancée finally met his eyes fully. And in that tiny moment, her smile stayed on her lips, but her pupils betrayed her. The note stayed warm in his palm for half a second, like it had its own heartbeat. Then it might as well have been ice. He didn't slam his glass down. He didn't accuse her. He didn't even blink like a man surprised. Calm didn't leave his face. Calm just sharpened. He folded the paper again and slid it beneath his plate as if it was nothing more than a receipt for dessert. Then he lifted his fork and cut into his steak like the world wasn't trying to rearrange his funeral schedule across the room. His fiancée watched him carefully, still smiling, still performing, but the way her fingers tightened around her wine glass gave her away. She was waiting for him to react. Waiting for anger. Waiting for a scene. Waiting for the kind of chaos that would make her betrayal feel justified. But he didn't give her that. He gave her something worse. He gave her silence. Hannah moved back to the service station on legs that barely remembered how to work. Her palms were sweating so badly she almost dropped the tray of glasses. A normal person would have run. A normal person would have whispered to the manager. A normal person would have found an exit and disappeared into the night. But Hannah wasn't normal tonight. Tonight she was a knife she'd never wanted to pick up. And she could feel it now. The way the room had changed without anyone noticing. The air grew heavier. The music sounded farther away. Laughter became thinner, like it could snap if someone breathed wrong. She kept her face neutral. She kept her posture straight. She walked back to the table because that was her job. And because if she ran now, someone would follow her. Her eyes flicked across the restaurant in fragments. Too fast for anyone to catch, but enough for her to count what mattered. One man near the bar wasn't drinking. His empty glass stayed untouched for too long. Two women by the window weren't eating. Their hands were in their laps, but their shoulders held tension like hidden weapons. A waiter she didn't recognize passed the kitchen door again. Too soon, too often, and always on the same side of the boss's table. Hannah swallowed the panic and returned to the table with a wine refill like she was bringing comfort instead of doom. The boss didn't look at her this time. His gaze stayed on his plate, but his fingers moved once. An almost lazy adjustment of his cufflink. It looked like nothing to his men. It was an order. Hannah felt it ripple through the shadows behind him. One man shifted his weight. Another took half a step closer to the wall. A third subtly angled his body so his jacket opened just enough for a weapon to be accessible without being seen. The boss's fiancée didn't notice. She was too busy watching his face, trying to read what she couldn't control in the boss. He kept eating, slow and precise, like every cut of meat was a countdown he owned. She tried to laugh again, softer this time. "You're so quiet tonight," she said, voice like silk wrapped around a blade. "Are you tired?" He hummed once. Not agreement, not denial. Just a sound that told her she'd been heard. And dismissed. Hannah poured more wine into the fiancé's glass, and her hand trembled so slightly she prayed the crystal wouldn't betray her. She saw the boss's eyes flick to the shaking for half a second, then away. He didn't comfort her with a look. He didn't warn her with words. He simply continued to let her stand in the center of his war like a witness that couldn't be erased now. Hannah's chest tightened. How many killers were inside this restaurant? 2, 5, 10. And why did it feel like the ones in suits weren't the only threat? The kitchen door opened again, and a staff member rolled out a cart with covered plates. Too covered. Too controlled. Too purposeful. Hannah's heartbeat stumbled. She'd seen carts like that before. In places where people vanished quietly. She moved back, making space, and that's when she saw the boss's hand move again. His fingers brushed the edge of his napkin like he was wiping his mouth. That tiny motion sent another signal. His right-hand man, standing at a distance, lifted his chin by a fraction. Confirmation received. Then something impossible happened. The boss stood up, his chair scraped the floor softly, polite enough to be ignored, and he leaned toward his fiancée as if to whisper something romantic. His mouth came close to her ear, his voice low enough that even Hannah couldn't hear it. His fiancée's smile brightened, relieved, thinking she'd won whatever game she started. Then he did it. He gently guided her to stand with him, like a gentleman helping his woman adjust her seat. It was graceful. It was tender. It was the kind of move people would watch and think, love. Only Hannah saw the truth. He wasn't moving her, he was moving himself. He switched positions with her so smoothly she didn't even realize she was now sitting in the seat closest to the glass wall. The seat with the clearest line of sight from outside. The seat where the first bullet would go if the shooter was real. Hannah's breath caught behind her teeth. She wanted to scream. She couldn't. He returned to the table and sat down again, now shielded by his men, now angled away from the windows, now protected by the very body his enemies thought was on their side. His fiancée took a sip of wine, still smiling. Still unaware the chair beneath her had just become a target. Then the lights flickered once, just once, a small tremor in the chandelier glow like the building blinked. And somewhere deep inside the restaurant, a heavy lock clicked, the front doors sealed shut with a quiet finality that made every exit feel like a lie. That Hannah's stomach dropped. The boss lifted his glass at last. Not to toast, not to celebrate, not to pretend. To mark the moment the room stopped being a restaurant and became a cage. His eyes rose slowly to meet his fiancée's again, and this time, her smile finally started to crack. Her smile didn't disappear all at once. It fractured in thin, invisible lines, like glass under pressure, until even she couldn't pretend it was still whole. The boss's fiancée lifted her chin, trying to keep her face smooth, trying to keep the illusion of control, but her eyes betrayed her first. They darted once toward the locked doors, once toward the window, once toward Hannah, then back to him like she was searching for the version of him she thought she could manipulate. "What is this?" she asked softly, the way people ask when they already know the answer but need to hear the lie anyway. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin with perfect timing. "Dinner," he replied. Hannah felt her skin go cold. She stood behind them with a tray in her hands that suddenly felt like it weighed more than her body. Her fingers were stiff around the silver edge. She had served hundreds of powerful men in this city. She had learned the rhythm of rich cruelty and expensive secrets, but she had never seen power look like this. So quiet, so controlled, it made the room obey without anyone being ordered. The fiancée's laughter came out a second too late. "You're scaring your staff," she said, eyes bright with forced charm. "And your guests." The boss's gaze moved slowly across the restaurant. The people who had been laughing 5 minutes ago now sat too still, listening without wanting to. No one spoke above a whisper. Every fork sounded like an alarm when it touched porcelain. He looked back at his fiancée. "They're not my guests," he said. "They're witnesses." Hannah's throat tightened. She looked around again, really looked this time, and saw what she'd missed before. Men seated too strategically, angles too clean, hands too hidden. A couple near the center table had an untouched dessert. A woman near the wall had her phone face down but her thumb resting on the screen like she was waiting for a signal. The fiancé's eyes flicked to the same woman. Then away so fast it almost didn't count. But the boss counted it. His face didn't change. His expression stayed composed. Yet something wounded lived under the calm, something older than anger. He looked hurt. Hannah didn't understand why that disturbed her more than rage ever could. His fiancée leaned in, voice lowering, intimacy pretending to return. "You're acting like I've done something wrong." He didn't answer her immediately. He looked at her the way a man looks at a portrait of someone he used to trust. "Did you?" he asked. She held his stare. And for a second her mask slipped. Not fear exactly. Not guilt either, more like annoyance, that her plan wasn't going smoothly. "Of course not," she said too fast. "You think I would betray you?" Hannah's stomach sank. Because Hannah realized the worst part wasn't that she might be lying. The worst part was that she'd practiced the lie, that she'd rehearsed it for him. The boss's fingers tightened under the table, just enough for Hannah to see it. A vein rose along his hand like a warning sign. His composure wasn't effortless. It was enforced. He was holding himself back from becoming something the whole city feared. And he was doing it in front of a woman he should have loved enough to trust. Hannah stepped back, pretending to adjust the tray. She didn't want to be involved in whatever was about to happen, but the room had already swallowed her into it the moment she slipped him that note. She turned her head toward the window again. And froze. There were men outside, not walking like pedestrians. Not waiting like customers. Positioned. Watching. Their silhouettes sat inside the streetlights like stains that wouldn't wash out. One of them lifted his phone. Another shifted his coat, revealing the shape of something metallic underneath. Hannah's breath snagged in her chest. She realized the restaurant wasn't just locked from the inside. It was surrounded, and the boss knew. He had known the moment he read her note. That's why he'd switched seats. That's why he'd stayed calm. That's why he'd let his fiancée smile like she owned the night. Because he was buying time, not peace. The fiancée reached for his hand, trying to soften him with touch. "Whatever this is," she whispered, "we can fix it." His eyes dropped to her fingers on his skin, then lifted again, distant and cold. "You don't fix rot," he said quietly. "You cut it out." Her smile fell completely then. She opened her mouth, maybe to threaten, maybe to plead, but she never got the chance. The sound came like lightning. A violent crack that made the whole room flinch as one, a gunshot. The glass behind them splintered, not shattering, but spiderwebbing outward in a brutal white bloom. A warning shot, close enough to prove the shooter could have killed them if he wanted. Hannah screamed without sound. Her knees almost buckled. The boss moved instantly, faster than thought. His chair slammed back. His men surged like shadows unfolding into bodies. The fiancée gasped, hands flying to her throat, her eyes finally wide with real fear. And Hannah felt a hand close around her wrist. It was his hands, firm, shaking. Possessive in a way that wasn't romance. It was survival. He leaned close enough that his breath brushed her ear. His voice low like a blade sliding from its sheath. "You're coming with me." The first thing Hannah noticed was how quickly silence could turn into movement. In 1 second, the restaurant was still full of soft music and expensive perfume. The next, it was a battlefield without the chaos people expected. No screaming, no dramatic panic. Just a sudden, terrifying obedience. Soon as the warning shot cracked the glass, the boss's men shifted positions like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Chairs scrape. A woman's wine glass tipped over and rolled across the tablecloth, spilling red like it had been planned. Customers dropped low instinctively, hands over their heads, some praying, some frozen, some already crying without making a sound. The fiancée stood too stiff, too pale, her eyes frantic now, darting to every exit she thought she could still control. But the exits were no longer hers, they weren't anyone's. The boss didn't look at the broken glass again. He didn't need to. He already knew where the shooter was. He already knew the angle. He already knew the reason. He pulled Hannah harder, and her body followed even though her mind couldn't catch up. Mister," she started, but her voice snapped in her throat. He didn't slow down. "Don't speak," he said, calm enough to terrify her more than shouting ever could. Hannah stumbled as he dragged her around the table, her tray clattering to the floor. Plates shattered. Silverware jumped like it was alive. Someone behind her whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer and a curse in the same breath. The boss's men formed a tight wall around him, the kind that didn't just protect, they erased him from view if he wanted it. Hannah found herself at the center of that wall by accident, pressed against power like she'd been grabbed by the tide. She didn't understand why he was taking her with him. She didn't understand why he hadn't left her behind like a loose end. She was just a waitress, she was nobody in his world. But he was holding her wrist like she mattered too much to drop through the blur of bodies and fear. Hannah saw his fiancée reaching for him. "Wait," she called. "Don't leave me here." Her voice broke on the last word, and Hannah felt something inside her twist because for a heartbeat, the woman sounded human. Then the boss turned his head, slow, controlled, and looked at his fiancée like she was already a memory. "Stay," he said. He didn't say it like advice, he said it like punishment. And that was when Hannah understood the scariest thing in the room wasn't the gunman outside. It was the man beside her who could choose, who lived in a single word. Security shoved open the kitchen doors, and the air changed immediately. Heat hit Hannah's face. Oil and spice and steam. The sharp scent of metal from knives. The staff inside were already pressed against the counters, eyes wide, hands trembling, their bodies obeying orders that hadn't even been spoken yet. One chef crossed himself quickly. Another stared at the boss like he was staring at God's darker brother. Hannah's shoes slipped on something wet. Water, oil she didn't know, and she nearly fell. The boss's grip tightened at her wrist and kept her upright without looking back. His control wasn't just in his face, it was in his hands. It was in the way chaos couldn't touch him unless he allowed it. Hannah heard footsteps behind them, heavy and fast. Another shot rang out, closer this time, somewhere outside the back alley. Someone shouted in Korean. A steel tray crashed against a wall. The kitchen door at the far end blew open, and cold night air poured in like a threat. The alley was narrow. Too narrow. A perfect trap if you didn't own it. The boss moved first, pushing Hannah forward, his men widening the wall around them. Hannah's heart slammed so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Her breath came sharp and loud in her ears. Her eyes caught movement on the rooftop above the alley. Flicker. A silhouette shifting behind a vent, a muzzle flash. Hannah didn't even have time to scream. The boss's right-hand man stepped into the line like he'd been born to die for him. The shot hit him high, near the shoulder, ripping through fabric and flesh. The sound he made wasn't dramatic. It was short, broken. Human. He crashed into the wall, sliding down, leaving a streak of blood that looked too real against the pale brick. "No," Hannah whispered before she could stop herself. The boss turned, and something finally snapped in his face. Not panic. Not fear. Rage so quiet it looked like emptiness. He stepped toward his man, one hand still anchoring Hannah, the other already pulling a weapon from under his coat like it was part of him. "Move," the boss ordered his men, voice flat. "Get her out." Hannah didn't want to go. She didn't want to look away. She didn't know why, but she felt the weight of that man's collapse like it mattered personally, like she'd seen him before, like her body recognized him before her mind did. She leaned forward instinctively, hearing her own voice tear out of her chest. "June." The name echoed through the alley like a mistake. The bleeding man's eyes lifted, unfocused, searching. His lips parted as if he wanted to answer, but he couldn't. The boss's head turned slowly toward Hannah, his grip tightened again, not cruel, but absolute, and Hannah realized with sudden horror that she wasn't just a waitress caught in a mafia boss's bad night. She was a woman who had just screamed the name of his most trusted man like she'd known him all her life, and the worst part was, she had. The car ride felt longer than it was. The city outside the tinted windows kept moving like nothing had happened, like people weren't bleeding in kitchens and dying in silence for power they'd never touch. Hannah sat rigid in the back seat, her shoulders tight, palms pressed against her thighs like she was afraid her hands might shake loose and reveal what she'd done. Her uniform was still on. The collar still smelled like restaurant perfume and smoke and fear. She kept staring at the dark glass, not because she wanted to look outside, but because she didn't want to look at him. The boss sat across from her, calm again, like panic was something that belonged to weaker men. His shirt was stained near the cuff. Not his blood. Someone else's. Maybe the right-hand man who'd taken a bullet because this night had decided to change its mind. He didn't touch his own injury. Didn't check his phone. Didn't ask if she was okay. Not in the normal way. But when the car turned through a private gate and the mansion appeared. Tall, cold, perfect. His eyes went to Hannah like a habit he didn't know he had. The compound swallowed them. The main doors opened before the car fully stopped, as if the house itself had been waiting to hold its breath for him. Lights were on everywhere. Security moved in shadows and earpieces. Boots silent on polished stone. No one spoke too loudly. No one laughed. Nothing in this place felt human. Hannah stepped out and the wind hit her cheeks, sharp enough to wake her up again. The boss walked around the car, and for a second she thought he would guide her with his hand. She braced for it. Her body tensed like pain was a language she'd learned too young, but he didn't touch her. He stopped a careful distance away, gaze fixed on her like she was glass that could shatter under pressure. "Inside," he said. The word wasn't cruel. It was worse than cruel. It was final. She followed him through the doors because her legs still worked and her pride didn't matter right now. The air inside was warm. Expensive. Quiet. A scent of cedar and clean linen and something bitter underneath it, like old smoke buried in the walls. She looked down at her hands as she walked. Her fingers were red now. Not from blood. From grip marks. From panic. From clutching trays and knives and a man's wrist. When she slipped him the note that saved his life, her hands looked like proof. And proof was dangerous. She reached the foyer and froze because the ceiling was too high, the chandelier too bright, the silence too heavy. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a courthouse where the judge was already decided. The boss turned to one of his men, voice low and controlled. "Medic," he said. "Now." The guard nodded instantly and disappeared. Hannah swallowed hard, trying to hold her dignity together like a torn sleeve. "You don't need a medic," she forced out. "I'm fine." His eyes dropped to her hands again. "You're not." She hated how he spoke like he could see through her skin. She looked away. "You're bleeding." He didn't even glance at himself. Not important. That made her chest tighten. Because what kind of man treated his own pain like an inconvenience, but noticed bruised fingers on a stranger? She tried to lift her gaze to him, to demand answers, to regain control. But the moment her eyes met his, something in her collapsed. She saw it. Behind the calm, behind the monster reputation, behind the tattoo on his neck like a warning label. He looked tired, not exhausted. Not weak. Just tired in the way men got when they'd already buried too many bodies and still couldn't sleep. Hannah's throat burned. She dropped her eyes again because she didn't trust herself not to break. He led her deeper into the mansion, past dark hallways and glass walls and security screens that showed every angle of the estate. She realized quickly there were cameras everywhere. Even in the quiet places. Even in the beautiful places. He wasn't just protecting his home, he was controlling it. He opened a door to a private sitting room with soft lighting and a fireplace that wasn't lit. A room made for comfort but designed like a trap. One entry, one exit, nowhere to hide. Hannah stayed near the edge of the space, like sitting meant surrendering. The medic arrived fast, a woman with a black medical case and eyes that didn't ask questions. She moved toward Hannah instinctively. Hannah flinched before the woman even touched her. And the boss noticed. That small reaction made his gaze sharpen. Not at Hannah, at the world. The medic hesitated, unsure, and that's when his voice cut through the room like a blade. "Nobody touches her," he said. "Not even with questions." The medic stopped instantly, head bowing. "Yes, boss." Hannah's breath caught. Her stomach turned. "I don't belong here," she whispered. He didn't soften. "You do now." The words shouldn't have sounded like protection. They sounded like ownership. She was still standing there, fighting her own trembling, when footsteps rushed in from the hallway. His men returned. Faces tight, posture wrong. One of them held a phone like it was burning his palm. He bowed low. "Boss." The boss didn't blink. "Report." The man swallowed. "Your fiancé is gone." Hannah felt the temperature drop. And in the silence that followed, she understood something terrifying. Whatever had started in that restaurant wasn't finished. IT had only moved locations. The news didn't land like a shock. It landed like a confirmation. The boss didn't ask where she went. He didn't ask who let her slip past his men. He simply stared at the phone in his guard's hand as if the screen had just spoken a truth he already knew. Hannah stood in the corner of the sitting room, her heart beating too fast to be quiet. The fiancé was gone. Not dead. Not missing. Gone by choice, by design, by plan. She felt the urge to step back, as if distance could keep her out of the blast radius of whatever came next, but this was his house. There was nowhere to step that wasn't still inside his world. The boss dismissed his men with a single gesture. They moved like shadows obeying gravity. The door shut. Silence returned. Thick, expensive, dangerous. The medic was still there, hovering with her kit like she wanted to help but didn't know what was allowed anymore. The boss looked at her once. Leave. The medic left immediately. Hannah thought he would turn on her next. Rage. Demands. Punishment, as she'd seen men like him before. Not mafia bosses, just men with power. Men who believed answers were something they could drag out of people. But the boss didn't raise his voice. He walked to the bar cart in the corner and poured himself a drink he didn't touch. He set the glass down untouched, like even alcohol couldn't change what he was about to do. Then he faced her fully. His expression was calm. His body was calm. But something in his eyes had turned still in a way that made Hannah's stomach hollow. "What's your name?" he asked. Hannah's lips parted. Simple question. And yet it felt like a blade sliding under her ribs because she knew she couldn't answer it normally. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Hannah." He studied her. "That's the name on your uniform." She swallowed. "It's my name." He didn't argue. He simply nodded once, like he was allowing her that small lie as a courtesy. His voice lowered, softer. "You were trained." Hannah frowned. "I was a waitress." He walked closer, stopping just far enough away that she could still breathe. A waitress doesn't notice entry patterns. A waitress doesn't read signals in people's hands. A waitress doesn't slip a warning note to the most hunted man in Seoul with steady fingers. Hannah's throat tightened. She tried to laugh but it wouldn't come. "Maybe I'm just observant." "No," he said gently. "You're planted." The word made her skin go cold. She looked at the door, then at the windows, then back at him. Every exit suddenly felt like a joke. "Who sent you?" he asked. Hannah didn't answer. She expected him to threaten her when she stayed silent. She expected him to turn darker. But he didn't. He just watched her like he was waiting for something inside her to break on its own. And that patience was worse than violence because it meant he believed time belonged to him. Hannah's voice came out rough. "If I tell you, I die." His gaze didn't shift. "If you don't tell me, you die anyway." The truth of it hit her harder than fear ever could. She took a shaky breath. "I didn't come to hurt you." He tilted his head slightly. "Then why did you warn me?" Hannah's eyes burned. She hated that question. Because the answer wasn't heroic. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't brave. It was messy. It was human, and it was the reason she'd been alive long enough to make it into his house. "Because," she whispered. "I saw the way she smiled." His jaw flexed once. "My fiancé." Hannah nodded slowly. She wasn't scared. Everyone else was. She swallowed, forcing the next words out like pulling glass from her throat. "She wanted you dead." The boss's eyes stayed calm, but something ancient moved behind them. Memory. A betrayal he had swallowed years ago and never fully digested. "Continue," he said. Hannah wiped her palm against her uniform. "I was placed at that restaurant 3 months ago. Told to watch you. Learn your habits. Learn what you eat. Who you trust. When you arrive. When you leave." His voice stayed quiet. "And you listened." Hannah's chin lifted, defiant through fear. "I listened because I didn't have a choice." He nodded once like he understood that kind of captivity too. Hannah inhaled sharply. But tonight wasn't supposed to happen like this. His eyes narrowed. Explain. Hannah looked down at her bruised hands, at the fading red marks from gripping his wrist earlier, like she could erase what she'd done if she stared hard enough. Your fiancé wasn't acting alone, she said. She didn't set this up. She only opened the door. The boss took one slow step closer. Who arranged it? Hannah's breath trembled. Someone higher. Someone untouchable. The words fell into the room, and the room felt smaller. Like even the walls were listening. Like the cameras were holding their breath. His face didn't change. But his voice did. It dropped into something colder than steel. Only one man can order that. And Hannah knew in that moment. She had just said the name of the real enemy without even speaking it out loud. The first time Hannah heard the word bounty, it wasn't in a movie. It wasn't in a rumor whispered over drinks. It was on a clean, polished television screen in a living room that smelled like money and danger. A reporter stood under bright studio lights, hair perfect, voice steady, as if what she was saying wasn't going to get someone killed before sunrise. The boss's house was quiet in the way cemeteries were quiet. Too maintained. Too controlled. Every corner watched. Every breath accounted for. And still, something had slipped inside. Even without bullets, Hannah felt the pressure building. Like the air itself was preparing to break. She stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself, wearing a coat that wasn't hers. It was too expensive, too heavy, like it was trying to pin her down and claim her as part of this place. The boss sat across the room, back straight, posture relaxed, eyes unreadable. He was not the kind of man who panicked. He was the kind of man other people panicked around. His men moved silently on the edges of the room, scanning screens, listening to earpieces, collecting information like it was oxygen. Hannah's stomach tightened when she saw one of the security monitors show the restaurant again. The front entrance. The locked doors. The moment the lights flickered. The angle of the shooter outside. The timestamp at the corner. Her mouth went dry because she finally understood the truth behind the chaos. It wasn't an assassination attempt. It was a spectacle. They didn't just want him dead. They wanted him embarrassed first. Broken in public. Exposed as mortal. That realization hit Hannah harder than fear, because she'd seen what happens when powerful men lose control in front of witnesses. The city didn't just watch. The city remembered. The boss picked up his phone, glanced at a message, then turned his gaze to the television. He didn't speak, but something in his expression sharpened like a blade being drawn from a sleeve. This was never about the restaurant, he said at last. Hannah swallowed. Then what was it about? His voice stayed calm. A stage. He leaned back slightly, fingers resting on the arm of the chair like he owned time itself. A trap designed to end me where the city could see it. Where it would become a story. Hannah's pulse jumped. Your fiancé, he looked at her slowly, was a key. The words sank into Hannah's chest, heavy and sickening. She had been staring at the boss's fiancé as if she was the villain. A traitor in pearls. A smile with poison behind it. But what if she was smiling because she had no other way to survive? What if she was promised safety if she played her part? Hannah's lips parted. So, she might not even be the one controlling it. The boss's eyes narrowed slightly, not at her, but at the thought. No. But she knew enough. Hannah's hands began to shake again. She tried to hide them in the coat sleeves, like she had hidden bruises under a uniform. It was a habit of survival. Cover what's bleeding. Pretend you're fine. Don't give anyone a reason to tighten their grip. She should have stayed invisible. She should have poured wine and walked away. She should have let the lion eat its own fate and kept her head down, but she had slipped that note. She had betrayed fear. And now fear was coming back for her with teeth. His right-hand man, tall, cold-eyed, dressed in black, stepped closer and handed the boss a tablet. Boss. It's spreading fast. The boss glanced at the screen once. His expression didn't change. The room did. The air shifted. The guards moved. Doors clicked. Someone muted the television, then turned it back up louder like the world wanted them to hear it clearly. The reporter's tone sharpened, excitement disguised as concern. Breaking update tonight, she said. An anonymous source has issued a public reward for information leading to the arrest and delivery of a woman involved in the attempted assassination at the elite Orchid restaurant. Hannah's skin turned to ice. The screen flashed a blurred image. A screenshot from the restaurant's security footage. A figure in a waitress uniform. Her profile turned slightly. Her hand mid-motion as she leaned closer to the boss's table. It wasn't clear enough to identify her face perfectly, but it was enough. Enough for a city that lived on whispers. Enough for enemies hungry for leverage. And then the words appeared on the screen in bold letters, large enough to feel like a sentence. Wanted. The girl who warned him. Hannah couldn't breathe. The coat suddenly felt too tight. The room spun slightly, not from weakness, but from the sick realization of what her life had become in one night. Her voice came out cracked. They put me on the news. The boss didn't look at the screen. He looked at her, his face was still calm. But now there was something else there too. Something dangerous and personal, like he was no longer watching a stranger caught in crossfire, he was watching a liability that he refused to lose. He rose slowly, the movement controlled, deliberate. They didn't do that for nothing. Hannah forced herself to speak. What does it mean? His voice dropped. It means you're no longer a glitch in their plan. He stepped closer, and the lights above caught the hardness in his eyes. You're the new target. Hannah's throat tightened. I didn't ask for this. His expression did not soften. Neither did I. And then, as the television repeated the same terrifying headline like the city was chanting her death, Hannah realized something even worse than being hunted. She was now the reason a war could start. Hannah didn't sleep. Not because the bed was unfamiliar, or because the sheets smelled like wealth and strangers. She didn't sleep because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the note again. Her own handwriting. The curve of the letters. The way her hand had trembled, but not enough to stop her. She heard the reporter's voice too, soft and deadly, announcing her existence to the entire city like she was a prize. By morning, she understood something clearly. Hiding inside a monster's house didn't make her safe. It only made her important. And being important in this world was another way of dying. She waited until the mansion quieted into its artificial dawn routine. Guards rotating shifts, doors unlocking in patterns, footsteps pacing. Corridors like clockwork. The kind of place where even silence had rules. She moved barefoot at first, then found her shoes near the door. Her fingers shook as she slipped them on. Every sound felt too loud. Every breath felt borrowed. Hannah didn't take anything. No jewelry, no money, no apology letter. She didn't want a single thread of this night tied to her when she stepped outside. She found the corridor leading toward the front entrance, guided by instinct and the faint hum of cameras hidden in walls. She could feel them watching. Not as strangers watching her, but as a system deciding whether to allow her to exist beyond these gates. In the foyer, she paused. A huge portrait hung on the wall. An old family photo, stiff and perfect, the kind that tried to convince the world that power came from love and tradition. Hannah stared at it and felt something twist in her chest. She thought of her own family back home, far away, faces she hadn't seen in years. People who would never understand this world. She walked faster after all the violence she'd seen last night. The front door opening didn't feel like freedom. It felt like betrayal. She stepped outside. Cold air hit her skin, sharp enough to wake every nerve. The sky was pale gray. The grounds were too perfect. Trimmed grass, stone paths, iron lamps, a gate that looked less like a boundary and more like a warning. This place wasn't a home. It was a fortress. And she was a weakness walking out of it on her own feet. She reached the front gate slowly, palms sweaty, heart pounding so hard she thought it might echo through the cameras. A guard stood near the control booth, posture straight, face blank. Hannah didn't stop walking. She didn't ask permission. She didn't look up, she just kept moving, like if she acted like she belonged outside, the world might believe her. The gate was still locked. She swallowed. Forced her voice out. Open it. The guard didn't move. Ma'am. Hannah's throat tightened. Please. The word tasted like humiliation. Like surrender. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. She had cried enough in her life when no one was looking. She refused to do it here, where even the walls felt like they had ears. She took another step closer to the metal bars and looked through them. Beyond the gate was the city road, empty at this hour, quiet like the world hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. She lifted her hand to the keypad herself, fingers trembling. "I'm leaving." Behind her, the guard's voice lowered. "Boss said you are not to," Hannah spun. Her eyes flashed. "I don't belong here." The guard froze, not because she was intimidating, but because she sounded like she was already broken. Like she had nothing left to threaten her with. She faced forward again. "Open it." Pause. Then a soft mechanical sound. The lock disengaged. The gate began to slide open. Hannah's breath caught, disbelief and dread fighting inside her chest. She didn't know why it was opening. She didn't know why no one stopped her. She only knew she had to go before she changed her mind. She stepped through the gap, out of the estate, onto the gravel beyond the gate. One more step and she would reach the sidewalk. One more step and she could disappear into the city before anyone could decide to claim her. Hannah took that step. And hands exploded out of the darkness. Two men grabbed her from behind, yanking her backward so hard her breath left her body in a silent gasp. Her shoes scraped the ground. Her nails tore against a sleeve as she fought. Instinctive, desperate, they were fast. Professional. Like they'd rehearsed this. She twisted, trying to see faces, but a gloved hand slammed over her mouth. Another arm locked around her waist like iron. She kicked. He scratched. She bit down hard and tasted blood. Someone else's or hers. She didn't know. Her head snapped sideways and her cheek slammed into the metal gate. White pain burst behind her eyes. Her vision blurred. Hannah heard the guard shout. Heard footsteps running. Heard panic breaking the mansion's controlled silence. Then she heard the voice she didn't want to hear, because it meant she hadn't escaped anything. She'd only proven she couldn't. He came like thunder behind her. His men poured out of the gate. The air turned sharp with violence before a single shot fired. Hannah tried to lift her head, tried to scream, but the hand over her mouth tightened until she couldn't breathe, and then she saw him. 2 seconds too late. Standing just beyond the open gate. Eyes locked on her like the world had narrowed to one point. His expression didn't change at first. It didn't have to. When Hannah's face turned toward him, blood streaking down her cheek. Something in his gaze snapped. Cold control shattered into something darker. Something human. Hannah's eyes widened, pleading without words, as if she could still convince him she didn't want this. She never wanted to be saved. She only wanted to survive. But the boss wasn't looking at her like a woman making choices anymore. He was looking at her like someone had stolen what he claimed to protect. And that was a crime his world did not forgive. The men dragging Hannah didn't make it 10 steps. The boss moved first. No warning, no words. Just violence so clean it looked like discipline. One of the attackers went down before Hannah even understood she'd been released. The second tried to pull a weapon, but the boss's hand caught his wrist, twisted, and the sound that followed wasn't dramatic. It was final. Hannah stumbled backward, choking on air, fingers shaking, skin cold. Blood from her cheeks smeared across her jaw as she tried to steady herself. But the boss didn't look at her. Not yet. He looked at the men like they were paperwork someone had filed incorrectly. The guard who had opened the gate fell to his knees, whispering apologies in Korean, voice breaking like glass. The boss didn't answer him either. His eyes stayed on the attacker still breathing, still trying to crawl away like life could be begged for. Hannah's stomach turned. "Stop!" Her voice came out cracked. "Please stop." That was the first time he looked at her. And in that single glance, she understood something that terrified her more than bruises, more than threats, more than the bounty. She had just seen what he became when he cared. His hand reached out, not gentle, not romantic, just certain. He caught her elbow like he was checking if she was still real. Then his thumb brushed the blood on her face, and his jaw tightened in a way that made the air around him feel dangerous. "You tried to leave," he said quietly. Hannah swallowed, lips trembling. "I didn't want this." He leaned closer, voice low enough that his men couldn't hear the softness hidden beneath the threat. "You don't get to choose what the world does to you." Her eyes flashed. "Yes, I do." The words surprised even her. Rage crawled out from under her fear, sharp and alive. I didn't ask you to open your gate. I didn't ask you to follow me. I didn't ask you to destroy people in my name like I'm some trophy. His gaze darkened. Then why did you warn me? Hannah flinched at the question because the truth was ugly. She didn't even know why she had done it. She only knew that when she saw his fiancée smiling too calmly and the signals in the room too perfect. Her body had moved before her mind. She whispered, "Because I thought you deserved to live." The boss stared at her like that sentence was a wound. And now, Hannah's throat tightened. Now I think I ruined everything. Behind them, the attacker coughed, trying to speak. The boss turned his head, eyes flat. One of his men stepped forward, ready to finish it, waiting for permission. Hannah grabbed the boss's sleeve, nails digging into expensive fabric. "Don't." He didn't move. "He came for you." Hannah shook her head, voice shaking. "I don't want blood." His lips barely moved. "You already have it." Hannah looked down and realized her hands were stained, smudged red from her own face, from being grabbed, from fighting. Her stomach lurched and she backed away, shaking like she was freezing. "You're not safe," he said. "Not in the city. Not outside my walls. Not even inside them, apparently." She lifted her chin, trying to hold on to pride when everything else was falling apart. "So what, you'll lock me up?" His eyes softened for half a second, then hardened again. "I'll keep you alive." The way he said it didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like a sentence that Hannah's voice cracked. "I never asked for your protection." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell smoke, cold air, and something sharp beneath it, something like danger that never sleeps. "You became my problem the moment you touched my fate." Her breath hitched. "I'm not your problem." His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, as if he hated himself for noticing anything human about her. "You are my weakness." The words landed between them like a loaded weapon. Hannah whispered, "That sounds like a curse." He didn't deny it. He turned sharply and walked back through the open gate, dragging the entire world with him. His men moved fast, surrounding Hannah without touching her, forming a wall of bodies that made the morning air feel smaller. Hannah didn't want to follow. She didn't want to go back inside. But the street outside wasn't a street anymore. It was a hunting ground. They brought her into the estate like she was evidence, like she was war. The moment the doors shut behind them, the boss made one call. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic. He simply spoke her existence into the city. "From this moment," he said into the phone, calm as stone, "she is under my name." Hannah's chest tightened. "No, don't." He ended the call, eyes on hers. "Now they'll hesitate. Or they'll come harder," she whispered. He didn't blink. "Let them." The news spread before the sun climbed. A single line on every mouth in every place where fear is traded like currency. The boss had claimed someone, a black waitress with bruises. A nobody with a target on her back. Hannah stood at the mansion window, watching the world outside turn into something she couldn't undo. And then a message came through his secure phone. One sentence. No signature. No mercy. The boss read it, and for the first time since the gunfire, his face changed, not with anger, with a cold, quiet kind of grief. Hannah's voice was barely audible. "What is it?" He turned the screen toward her. The message said, "Then we'll take her in front of you." By dawn, the city would look exactly the same to people who didn't know how power moved. The same glass towers. The same luxury cars sliding through wet streets. The same neon reflected in puddles like nothing had happened. But inside the boss's estate, time had cracked open, and nothing could be put back the way it was before Hannah slipped him that note. The message from his enemy stayed on the screen like a curse that refused to fade. "Then we'll take her in front of you." Hannah couldn't breathe properly after that. She stood in the silent hallway, listening to men shift positions behind doors, hearing the quiet clicks of weapons being checked without drama. Every sound inside the house was controlled. Every movement had purpose. Even the air felt measured. The boss didn't ask her if she was afraid. He didn't comfort her. He simply walked into the security room and stared at the cameras like he could intimidate the city itself into behaving. "Lock it down," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Everything obeyed. The estate became a sealed world. Gates shut. Cameras rotated. Drones rose into the cold sky. Phones stopped being normal phones and became tools of war. Hannah watched it all through a doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, feeling small in the middle of something too big to name. She didn't belong here. But she didn't belong anywhere else anymore either. A medic tried to approach her. One step, two. The boss's glance cut the room in half, and the medic stopped instantly like he'd touched a live wire. "No one touches her," the boss said again, as if he had to remind the world that Hannah's body was no longer public property. Hannah's mouth went dry. It should have made her feel protected. Somehow it made her feel claimed. The boss turned toward her, and for the first time his control looked like something else, like a man holding himself together with rage and willpower alone. "Come," he said. Hannah didn't move at first. "Where?" He didn't answer. He walked anyway, and she found herself following because fear has a way of choosing for you. He took her into a private room far from windows, far from entrances, where the silence was thicker. A lamp glowed softly, the only warmth in the entire house. He closed the door behind them. Sounded like a decision. Hannah's throat tightened. "I don't want to die because of you." The boss's eyes didn't flinch. "You won't." She laughed once, sharp and broken. "That's what everyone says right before someone dies." He stepped closer, slow, restrained, like he was approaching a line he wasn't allowed to cross. "I survived the city because I didn't care about anyone." His voice lowered. "And then you did what you did." Hannah swallowed, staring at him, remembering the way he grabbed her wrist, the way his men moved like shadows, the way blood appeared and disappeared like it was nothing. "You saved me," he said. "But you also ruined me." Hannah froze. "I didn't mean to." "I know." His jaw clenched. "That's why it's worse." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something folded, already worn at the edges from being handled too many times. Paper. Not digital. Not tracked. Physical file. Hannah's heart started to pound. "What is that?" He didn't answer immediately. He placed it on the table between them like an offering and a threat at the same time. "You want to know why my fiancé smiled too calmly," he said. "Why the restaurant felt like a stage?" Hannah's breath caught. "Yes." He opened the file. Inside were photos, names, transactions. People in suits. People in uniforms. People who smiled in daylight and did evil in private. Hannah recognized one face and felt her stomach drop so hard she thought she might vomit. "She wasn't my fiancée because I loved her," the boss said softly. "She was my leash." Hannah shook her head. "No, that's not. It is." His eyes were tired now. Not weak. Just old in a way no young man should be. "She belonged to the man who wants you dead. I agreed to the engagement to delay a war I wasn't ready to finish." Hannah's voice came out like a whisper. "So she was bait." "Yes." He didn't blink. "And so were you." Hannah backed away from the table, shaking. "Then why did you keep me alive?" His gaze locked onto hers. "Because you didn't deserve to be used." Hannah felt tears burn her eyes, not from softness, but from anger at how unfair the world was. "And what now?" she demanded. "I live here forever like a prisoner with security." His mouth tightened. "If you step outside, they will take you." Hannah stared at him for a long time, searching for the line where the man ended and the monster began. "So what am I to you?" she asked. The boss's answer was barely audible. "A consequence." The word chilled her. Because it wasn't romantic. It was honest. Outside the first attempt came. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just a power cut that lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds was all it took for trained men to move. Hannah heard doors slam, boots hitting marble, a muffled shout, then silence again. The lights returned. The boss didn't move from where he stood. He looked at the ceiling as if he could see through it. "They're testing me," he said. Hannah's voice trembled. "And you?" He turned to her slowly. "I'm answering." Minutes later, his right-hand man entered without knocking, eyes sharp, face tense. "Boss," he said. "We found her." Hannah's blood went cold. "Your fiancée." The boss's eyes didn't change. "Where?" "In the river district," the man replied. "She tried to run." Hannah held her breath. "Is she alive?" The boss paused, just long enough to make Hannah's chest ache. "She is breathing," he said. "For now." Hannah felt sick. "What are you going to do?" The boss walked to the table and picked up the file again. Evidence. The truth that could expose the people hunting her, clear her name, and end this nightmare without more blood. Hannah stared at it like it was a lifeline. "Give that to the police," she said quickly. "Give it to the media. Let the world see what they did." The boss's fingers tightened around the pages. "If the world sees this," he said quietly, "it won't save you. It will only make you famous enough to kill." Hannah's voice broke. "Then what's the point of surviving?" His gaze lifted. "To stay alive long enough to choose what you become after." He turned toward the fireplace that Hannah hadn't noticed before. A black marble mouth waiting to swallow something. Hannah stepped forward. "No," she whispered, understanding too late. "Don't destroy it." The boss didn't look at her. "If I keep this," he said, "you might win." Hannah's eyes widened. "Then keep it." His voice went colder, almost gentle in how merciless it was. "But if I keep this, I lose." Hannah froze. Because the truth wasn't just about the enemy. It was about him. About what he'd done to survive. About the blood that built his name. About the bodies that were never meant to be remembered. He held the evidence for a long moment, like a man holding the last clean part of himself. Then he fed it into the fire. The paper caught fast, curling into ash. Hannah made a sound that wasn't quite a sob. "You're burning my freedom." The boss watched it burn without blinking. "No," he whispered. "I'm burning the only thing that could ever set you free. Because it would also be the thing that kills you." Hannah's knees felt weak. She turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth, trying not to fall apart. Outside, the city was waking up. People were leaving warm apartments for warm cars. Couples were laughing in cafes. Someone somewhere was putting on lipstick, thinking the world was normal. But Hannah stood in a mansion that wasn't a home, staring at a man who had just chosen power over redemption. The boss spoke behind her, quiet as a confession. "By dawn," he said, "only one truth survives." Hannah didn't turn around. Her voice came out hollow. "And what truth is that?" The boss's answer was the softest thing he'd said all night. "That you saved me." Hannah shut her eyes. Because saving him had cost her everything. She didn't survive because she was the strongest woman in the city. She survived because she decided the truth was worth dying for. And by morning, she realized the hardest part wasn't saving him. It was surviving what he became after.